There are conflicts where the good guys and the bad guys are obvious. Northern Ireland was not one of those conflicts. The Troubles, 30 years of sectarian violence, political terror, and open warfare between paramilitaries in the British state, produced roughly 3,700 deaths. But inside that war, there was another war, a quieter one. And it was, in some ways, worse. Because inside the IRA, the organization that was killing British soldiers and planting bombs in shopping centers, there was a man working for the British Army. Not just any man, the man responsible for hunting traitors. And according to the most exhaustive criminal investigation ever conducted into the Troubles, the man that was likely responsible for far more deaths than he prevented. His codename was Stakeknife, and this is what happens when a state decides that managing violence is more important than stopping it. Freddie Scappaticci was born on January 12, 1946, in the Markets area of Belfast, a tight working-class Catholic neighborhood nestled between the city center and the River Loch. His father was an Italian immigrant named Danny Scappaticci, who had arrived in the 1920s. Like many Italian families in Belfast at the time, the Scappaticcis ran an ice cream business. There was actually a small cluster of Italian immigrant families in the area, and it ended up being coined Little Italy. Freddie grew up playing football, and he even briefly trialed for Nottingham Forest. However, after 3 weeks, the young teenager decided that he was homesick and called it quits. He settled back in the Belfast area and became a bricklayer. By 1969, the world around him was coming apart. In August of that year, sectarian riots erupted across Northern Ireland, Catholic neighborhoods were attacked, homes were burned, and people were killed. The British Army arrived, initially welcomed by many Catholics as protection, but that relationship deteriorated fast. Within months, the Provisional IRA had formed as a militant splinter from the older official IRA. Their argument was that armed struggle was the only language that Britain understood. Scappaticci joined the Provisionals around this time. On paper, it's not surprising. Thousands did the same thing. The IRA offered something powerful: identity, purpose, status, brotherhood. And Scappaticci was good at it. He rose through the ranks of the Belfast Brigade and eventually became the officer commanding in his home turf of the Markets. Then came internment. In August 1971, British forces launched Operation Demetrius, mass arrests of suspected Republicans, often held without trial. Scappaticci was among those that were swept up. He was interned at Crumlin Road, then transferred to Long Kesh. Long Kesh was supposed to weaken the IRA. It often did the opposite, because prison put rank-and-file militants in the same rooms as leadership. Scappaticci was interned alongside men like Jerry Adams and Ivor Bell, future central figures in the Republican movement. He came out of Long Kesh in early 1974, returned to the IRA, got rearrested, and interned again by August. The Belfast Telegraph ran it on the front page. Troops capture top IRA official, released again in 1975. By 1976, he was back active. And then, in 1978, something changed. Here is the central question. How does a man like Freddie Scappaticci become a British agent? Not a peripheral figure, not someone drifting at the edges of the movement, a veteran. An internee, a twice imprisoned IRA officer from a nationalist family in one of Belfast's most Republican neighborhoods. How does that man turn? The honest answer is that we just don't know for certain. There is no signed confession, and the British government still hides behind neither confirm nor deny to this day. But decades of investigative journalism and Operation Kenova's access to classified material have built up a pretty solid picture. What emerges is less James Bond and more human wreckage. One account says that he was beaten mercilessly by a senior IRA figure over some internal disputes. He was humiliated, furious, and ready to burn the whole thing down. Another points to a more mundane hook, that he had been caught in a VAT fraud on Belfast building sites. The RUC fraud squad had him, hook, line, and sinker, and he was too afraid to go back to jail. Because of that, the suggestion is that he decided to become a low-level informant. And then there's a darker theory, one that states that he had a long-standing interest in extreme pornography, and this made him vulnerable to blackmail. In 2018, Scappaticci was arrested for possessing extreme pornographic images on his computer. This computer was found during an Operation Kenova raid, and this occurred decades later. So we can't be certain, but it does give a little bit of a picture of who this man was and how far into the rabbit hole he may have gone. What the Army's own records actually reveal, which were recovered by Operation Kenova, is that Scappaticci wanted to end the conflict in Northern Ireland. He was dissatisfied with IRA leadership, he wanted to avoid prison, and he wanted money. It wasn't ideology, it was just a package deal. His initial contact was likely with the RUC Special Branch, graduating later to military intelligence handlers. One thing that we need to be clear about here is that the Force Research Unit, the Army unit most associated with his handling, wasn't even formed until 1980. By then, Scappaticci had already been an informer for roughly 2 years. The Force Research Unit, or the FRU, was a British Army intelligence operation designed to recruit deep cover agents inside paramilitary groups both Republican and loyalist. And as Scappaticci climbed in the IRA's internal security unit, he became the exact asset that this team had dreamed of. Because the internal security unit wasn't any IRA department. It was the department that hunted spies. The IRA's internal security unit, the ISU, existed because infiltration was real. British intelligence penetration of Republican networks was also real. Informers were everywhere. Or so the IRA feared. Their response was, by any measure, brutal. Suspected informers, which were called touts in IRA slang, were abducted, sometimes from their homes, sometimes lured into meetings under false pretenses, and sometimes snatched off the streets. They were taken to safe houses, blindfolded, bound, often stripped naked, interrogated for hours and sometimes even days. The questioning wasn't just about information, it was about breaking the person, using threats against their family, their children, and their bodies. If the ISU decided that you were guilty, you were executed, shot, typically in the head. Your body would be dumped, typically somewhere across the border, sometimes in a ditch, and sometimes hidden for years. The unit acquired its nickname, the Nutting Squad, because of these executions. They shot you in the nut. And the man who rose to lead this unit was Freddie Scappaticci. By all accounts, he was terrifying. One former IRA member described the moment Scappaticci walked unannounced into a family gathering in West Belfast in the 1980s. A room full of laughter and conversation that fell completely silent the moment he appeared. Because his presence meant one thing: someone might not be going home. Scap, as he was known, was the judge, jury, and executioner of the IRA's internal paranoia machine. Now, picture this from a British handler's perspective. Their agent wasn't just hearing about planned operations. He wasn't just identifying arms dumps or passing information along. He was controlling which members of the IRA were suspected of being informers. He could point suspicion in any direction. He could protect other British agents by steering the Nutting Squad away from them. He could sacrifice someone to protect his own cover. He could manufacture paranoia or suppress it. This made him, in the words of one former British Army general, a golden egg, the jewel in the crown of British military intelligence in Northern Ireland. And this is the moment where the story stops being a spy thriller and becomes something more dark. Because once you have an asset like that, once you have someone that is simultaneously IRA's chief spy catcher, and then also your spy, you're trapped. When your agent inside a violent organization starts participating in violence, you typically have three options. Option one, you pull them out. This will end the intelligence sharing and will probably expose the agent. Two, you can try to control what they do, which is nearly impossible when the whole point is that they have to appear authentic to the organization that they're infiltrating. Or three, you let it continue. You let them participate. And you tell yourself that it's justified because the information that they're providing is preventing something that could be much, much worse. Operation Kenova, the 8-year, €47 million criminal investigation into Stakeknife's activities, examined over 100 murders and abductions linked to the ISU. And in its interim report, published in March 2024, it delivered a conclusion that demolished the state's central defense. The British Army's justification for running Scappaticci was always the same. He had saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. Those are the words of General John Wolseley, a former British Army commander in Northern Ireland, who described Stakeknife as uniquely valuable. Kenova looked at the intelligence and said, no, that's not accurate. The number of lives plausibly saved by Stakeknife's intelligence was somewhere in the high single figures to low double figures. And then Kenova delivered the sentence that should have settled the argument. It is likely that Stakeknife's crimes resulted in more lives being lost than lives that were saved. In one case, more than any other, illustrates exactly what this logic looked like in practice. Frank Hegarty was a dairyman, an IRA quartermaster in the city's Northern Command, responsible for managing weapons. He was also a British agent, recruited by the Force Research Unit, or FRU, in the late 1970s and eventually reinstated inside the IRA with FRU assistance. In January 1986, the Irish Garda raided a series of IRA weapons dumps on the southern side of the border, dumps containing Libyan-supplied arms, including AK-47s, rocket launchers, and ammunition. This was a major seizure and a major blow to IRA operations. For the IRA, it was pretty simple that someone had talked. Hegarty panicked the night before the raids. His handler called him and he was driven to Aldergrove Airport and then flown to England on a British government aircraft. His FRU handlers then set him up in a safe house in Kent. After that, the pressure campaign ensued. According to multiple reports, including declassified Irish government files from 1987, Martin McGuinness, then a senior IRA figure in Northern Command, personally became involved. He approached Hegarty's mother, Rose, on multiple occasions and reportedly went down on bended knee, guaranteeing Frank's safety if he just came home. And British intelligence was listening. They had tapped phones. They heard Rose calling her son night after night, passing along these reassurances that she received from McGuinness. They knew that this promise was patently false, and they knew what the IRA did to confirmed informers. Hegarty eventually went home. He was abducted in County Donegal. His own sister unknowingly drove him to the rendezvous. There he was interrogated by the ISU, and in May 1986, his body was found on a roadside near Castledurg, County Tyrone, shot multiple times with his eyes taped shut. Now after this, there was a question that haunted British intelligence for over 40 years. Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't they warn him more forcefully? Why didn't they extract him? Why didn't they intervene? The answer is quite chilling. Saving Hegarty might have exposed Stakeknife. The Nutting Squad was investigating the arms seizure. If British intelligence intervened too visibly to protect Hegarty, it raised questions about how they knew. And those questions would lead right back to the ISU, and the ISU would lead right to Scappaticci. So, one agent was permitted to die to protect another. It's not an accident, it's not negligence, it's a decision. It's a chain of command. For years, the Stakeknife operation ran without breaking. Then in January 1990, it came within inches of unravel. Sandy Lynch was an RUC Special Branch informer embedded in the IRA in northern Belfast. The IRA's ISU suspected him, and in January 1990, he was abducted and taken to a house at 124 Carrigat Avenue in the Lenadoon area of West Belfast. Scappaticci ran the interrogation. Over the course of roughly 2 days, Lynch was stripped, blindfolded, bound, and subjected to what he later described as a psychological demolition job. Scappaticci told him he would be hung upside down in a cattle shed in South Armagh. Told him he'd be skinned alive. Told him his wife would have to identify him with no face because he would make sure Lynch had no face if he didn't confess. Lynch broke. He confessed in writing. He made a recorded admission. By IRA rules, that meant one thing. But on that ensuing Sunday, after Scappaticci had already left the house, the police raided and Lynch survived. Here's the extraordinary part. When police processed the house, they found Scappaticci's thumbprint on a battery left at the scene. Physical evidence, placing him at the location of an abduction and torture. Scappaticci fled to Dublin. He stayed there for almost 2 years. His handlers helped him construct an alibi. He claimed to have been at the Cargart Avenue house for a mundane reason, just doing some work. The homeowner confirmed it. In October 1992, he returned back to Belfast, where he was arrested, gave the alibi, and was then released. And he was never charged, despite Lynch identifying him, despite physical evidence, despite his name being mentioned 26 times in the trial of the other man convicted of the Lynch abduction and torture. So why wasn't he charged? Because the trial meant exposure. Exposure meant the state had to admit that it had been running and actively protecting the head of the IRA's torture and execution. And that was something that the state was not prepared to do. By 2003, the dam was breaking. Investigative journalists Greg Harkin and a former FRU operative using the pseudonym Martin Ingram, later identified as Ian Hurst, had pieced the story together. In May 2003, multiple newspapers published the same explosive claim: Freddie Scappaticci was Stakeknife. Scappaticci's response was remarkable. He didn't disappear quietly, he held a press conference. He denied everything. He demanded the British government publicly confirm that he was not an agent of the state, which the government refused. They invoked neither confirm nor deny, also known as NCND, the standard intelligence doctrine of saying nothing, neither admitting nor denying the existence of sources. This is one of the stranger ironies of the entire case. Scappaticci wanted the British state to lie for him, and the state wouldn't, not because it had any loyalty towards him, but because lying in one direction risked exposing secrets they were still protecting. So they said nothing. And that silence effectively became an accusation. Scappaticci left Belfast. He entered witness protection in England and lived for years in Manchester, then reportedly Guildford. Remarkably close to Aldershot Garrison, one of the Army's main bases in the southeast. He changed his name to Frank Cowley, drove a Mercedes. The Army helped him purchase property, and according to Kenova, discussed ways to obscure his asset ownership against future legal claims. His handlers told him if he stopped reporting, the loss would be felt throughout the intelligence world. For a man who had been personally linked to at least 18 murders, he lived comfortably, up until his death in April 2023 at age 77. He was never prosecuted for a single Troubles-era killing. In 2016, the PSNI, or the Police Service of Northern Ireland, referred the Stakeknife allegations to an external criminal investigation. That became Operation Kenova, which we've referenced throughout this video. Led initially by John Boucher, then Chief Constable of Bedfordshire Police, and later by Sir Ian Livingston when Boucher moved to the PSNI, Kenova was not a commission. It was a criminal investigation. A team of 80 detectives and civilian staff, a budget of £47 million, thousands of interviews, forensic work on decades-old evidence, extensive engagement with the families of the dead, and over 8 years, Kenova produced, in 2024, an interim report and a final report in December 2025. The interim report demolished the hundreds of lives saved argument. The final report went further. It described how MI5 had withheld a significant quantity of relevant material, only disclosing it after prosecution decisions had already been made and the interim report had already been published. Material that, by then, was too late to act on. Sir Ian Livingstone called this a significant failure on MI5's part, one that undermined confidence in the state's cooperation with the investigation. Kenova's final report also contained something almost absurd in its opacity. The government refused to allow Kenova to formally name Freddie Scappaticci as Stakeknife. This is despite the fact that at this point, Scappaticci is dead, not to mention that his identity had been universally known for upwards of 20 years at this point. The chief constable called the government's position publicly a pantomime. He said it was bordering on farce. He said that the blanket application of NCND denies victims and families the truth, fuels conspiracy theories, hinders investigations, and allows wrongdoers to escape justice. As of early 2026, recording of this video, the government still hasn't officially named him as Stakeknife. After 8 years and £47 million, Operation Kenova submitted multiple prosecution files on multiple individuals to the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland. The result was no prosecutions. Evidence too old, witnesses dead, chain of custody compromised, intelligence material unable to be used in open court, and looming over all of that, the Northern Ireland Legacy Act. Legislation passed in 2023, opposed by victims groups, human rights organizations, and the Irish government alike, which many believe was designed to permanently close the door on Trouble's accountability. The current UK government has committed to repealing it, but as of 2026, the legal landscape remains in flux. Intelligence operations are built to be deniable. Deep cover agent programs are built to be legally untouchable. The moral here is that the system doesn't fail to deliver justice on accident. Freddie Scappaticci died in 2023. He died in England, under state protection, under an assumed name. He died without being charged with a single Troubles-era murder. He died without ever publicly acknowledging what he had done. He died with his will, reportedly worth over 500,000 euros, sealed by court order for over 70 years. Even in death, secrecy didn't stop. His victims did not die quiet. They died terrified, blindfolded, bound, believing until the end that someone might stop it. They died on the instructions of a man who simultaneously was receiving a salary from the British Army and meeting his handlers regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes flying out of Northern Ireland on military aircraft for holidays, and at times when the RUC wanted him for questioning in connection with conspiracy to commit murder. The families of those victims have spent decades living with that knowledge. The knowledge that the state knew. The state had an agent inside the room, and the state chose not to act. So what was Stakeknife? Was he an IRA man? Was he a British agent? He was selfish. He was a torturer, he was a murderer, and he was a man who betrayed every side that he claimed to be on. But more than any of that, Stakeknife was a demonstration of what happens when an intelligence apparatus decides it's operating above the law, above accountability, above justice, above the ordinary obligation to protect human life. When the state runs a man who is torturing and murdering people, and its primary concern is protecting its intelligence product, the state has chosen not to fight terrorism. It has chosen to become the machinery that produces it. In this case, the line between terrorism and counterterrorism didn't blur, it disappeared. And in that disappearance, real people with families, children, and futures were treated as acceptable costs. The bleakest thing about this story is not that one man was evil. It's that the system, two systems, found ways to make that evil useful. And then spent decades making sure no one would ever have to answer for it. Thank you so much for watching.